Hello and welcome to this second video in the series looking at using Groove Agent SE5 as a drum sampler from scratch. So again, not using presets, but using the features that Groove Agent SE has to create your own drum kits from samples that you've created, downloaded, etc. So we're at the point where we finished last time where we've got some samples set up. So now we're going to look at the next sections here. So we're going to look at pitch, at filter, and the amp section. So that's what's going to be covered here because they have quite a few commonalities. So if you're not familiar with using envelopes, etc., you may need to look at some refresher on this, but hopefully this should be fairly self-explanatory. Now, I'm actually going to start off with a filter because this is normally the thing that people want to play with the most and makes a lot of sense, whereas the amp and pitch can sometimes be a little more unusual. So just going to stick with this D sample here and use the filter on it. So what we've got at the moment in the filter section, you can see there's not a lot happening because the filter is turned off. Now, if you've used any of the sampler tracks, etc. in Cubase 9 and onwards, then you'll know that there's quite a few options available to you. So we're just going to look at classic, but once we turn the classic filter on, all the controls become available. And you've got quite a range of filter types available to you. So low pass, band pass, high pass, all pass, and combinations of them. So if you're not familiar with what they are, once you've got this basically set up and running, so the filter is working, then you can use this as a way of learning them because you can play around with them and find out what's what. So looking at this here, I'm just going to leave this on low pass 24. So that's kind of the classic filter that everyone knows. Just going to click back on my instrument track so I can play it from the keyboard while we're playing with this. Now, the crucial controls generally will be cutoff and resonance. So if I bring the cutoff down as I'm playing the snare, we can see and hear as that cuts that off, stops the sound being so bright, etc. And resonance adds a boost in at the cutoff frequency, so we'll hear that kind of sweeping sound and you become much more aware of the cutoff frequency itself. Sounds like popcorn, etc. So you can play around with that. I'm sure most of you will have done that kind of thing before. But the area where this has some more interesting control is the fact you have an envelope here which you can program, and you've got the amount of envelope, etc., which is set to it. So we're just going to put the envelope into action here and listen to it. So I'm going to set the cutoff where we can hear it's working, and then now if you can see here I've effectively changed the attack time. It's taking 233 milliseconds to work, and as a result most of the snare has happened before the filter is opened. So there you can hear the sort of snares of the snare sound are audible, and here it will be fading up. So as a result, that's not there. And you can tailor that to whatever you want. So obviously if we add more envelope, then the envelope is going to open it up to a greater amount. So now it's fully open. And again, so there it's taken a while. Let's make it about 1/10 of a second. So the initial attack is dull, but then we hear the snares afterwards as the filter opens up. If we turn the resonance up, you'll hear how that effect is working. So you can hear that kind of squishy sound as the filter opens up. So sometimes using resonance can be useful to really highlight what's happening, although it may not be the most musical effect. So we can hear that there. Now we've also got the velocity to level. So you can hear, if I just take that attack section out, if I play quiet and loud. So not only because of the sound here, in fact what I'm going to do is just drag this all the way down so we're mostly hearing that rather than reload the whole thing and take ages. So there, the velocity So there, as we do that, you can hear increase in velocity brings the filter down. with that, an increase in velocity is bringing the filter up. We've also got velocity to time, so this can control how long the attack is. So for instance, this is segments here. So at the moment, segment 1 is attack, etc. So the time of this can be affected by velocity. So if you want really precise control over that, you can have it so it's a little difficult to hear this on this particular sound. Let's move. So you can hear where I'm playing at a high velocity there, and you can see it as much as anything. This time is happening much quicker, which again is another way to simulate a more realistic thing and give you more playing dynamics, which are more realistic. So quite a few of these controls are useful for taking what's probably a flat and boring sound and then making it much more playable and giving you sort of performance controls that you can just do using velocity. And then when you program in your velocities, etc., in your MIDI track, then it will respond to this. And again, it's all small things which make sounds more interesting rather than it just being the same sound all the way through. You can do this. But obviously, you've got loads of controls you can play around with here. Different filter types, including you can have distortion in there with these. And also the response to velocity here as well. So you've got loads and loads of options for an included synth, which is included with Cubase for free, effectively. There's really a lot you can do with this. So you can spend ages playing around with this. Now, once you move on, I'm just going to turn the filter off so we're concentrating solely on one thing. We've also got the amplifier, which has got very similar envelope here. So you can see we can put a long attack time on there and totally decimate the sound of our snare, etc. We've got some other modes which we will look at later on in some other videos, but at the moment we're just going to stay on the standard sustain mode. Volume and pan controls, velocity to level, which is normally 100%. So in other words, if you play louder, it goes louder. Now you can do it the other way around if you're crazy. So there you can probably hear via the microphone, I'm hitting the keyboard fairly hard and it's quiet. So you've got control over that. And again, velocity over time, so you can control how long that attack is. So on a lower velocity, it would take longer. And then on higher velocity, it's quicker. So this does a very similar thing to the controls we saw for the filter, but it's controlling the volume, not the filter. Sometimes the two have a degree of overlap depending on the settings of the filter, but you've got the ability to do that. And again, pick which segments are being controlled by that velocity to time, and also the response curve of velocity here. So normally linear would be okay, but sometimes you want something where it's not the standard linear one. So you've got all these different curves here, which are either sort of concave or convex curves. So there's plenty to play around with there. Now pitch, again, I'm just going to put that back to 100 for the default, and also put this back to 0. So effectively, we're not going to be doing anything with the amplifier. The amplifier is either on or off. And pitch. Now, pitch is another area where you can contribute to the realism or playability of the sound. So, say, often you hear things, particularly snare drum samples, where they just sound really identical all the time, and it's not that interesting. It's all these little small changes which can make an otherwise fairly repetitive piece sound more interesting. And this partly helps to recreate what analog equipment does, because most analog equipment, when you do the same thing twice, you get slight variations, as we've seen with the samples of this analog drum machine by Wave Alchemy. And this is one way to emulate that to a degree. So the random control can be quite useful. Now, again, I'll put it up too much. So I'm playing the same thing. I'll play the same thing every time. Now, obviously, unless you want some bizarre effect, that's probably too much. But just sort of low single-digit percentage will mean you're just getting small variations in the pitch there every time, which means, again, much like using round-robin samples, you get this variation each time you play it, so it doesn't sound like the machine gun snare You've got straightforward, coarse and fine tuning. So again, I'll play it on the keyboard. All the usual stuff, but there's something much better coming later on. So when we look at the sample section in a future edition, you'll see there's something much more powerful to allow you to tune it in a much more musically worthwhile way, but fine tuning as well. So if you want to tune your snare or any other sample to fit with your key, then that's useful. Interesting, we've got pitch bend, which you don't always get on a drum, but this is per pad as well, so you can add in some pitch bend. So let's just do down -2 and up +2 for standard. And if I play that with some pitch bend. So again, you could find that useful to create interesting effects in there. Velocity to level, velocity to time, again, for our pitch. And the envelope amount. So we've got an envelope, and you can see this one looks slightly different to the filter and amp envelopes. And the reason it can go up as well as down, so you can do positive changes or negative changes. So let's just make that go up and then put in some envelope. Now this obviously is too much. You can hear that effect. So it's going up. You can hear that quite nicely there, going down and then back up on the snare. And sometimes putting in just a little bit of this and having that in there can add some nice variations in there as well. And the last little bit we're going to look at in here is the key range. Now the key range, if you turn it on and then play a key, it turns itself off, which is reminiscent of the box that you switch on and then the hand comes out and turns it back off. But actually this can be quite useful because sometimes you will want a pad to be played on multiple notes. So here I'm going to spread this from D to D sharp 1. To do this, and if I change the high key to D sharp 1, we can see that plays there, but also plays there as well. And again, that's useful for something that we will see later on in the series, which can be quite useful for creating interesting snare drum effects, and makes it much simpler and quicker to do something that previously I've spent quite a while, relatively speaking, creating in projects. So there, while we don't see a sample because there isn't a sample assigned to this, and you could have a separate sample assigned to that as well, but this is like a master with the big notes, and we can see that small notes are on there to show you that another pad is being played here as well. So we'll just turn that off. So that's been a run through of the pitch, filter and amp sections in Groove Agent SE5. I hope you find that useful. If you have, please subscribe to the channel, as subscriptions obviously help in recommending it to other people. And I will see you soon.